What I love about the Bible is such a page turner. So as we look at reviewing what we've read this last week and put it into the meta-narrative, it's important for us to go back and look at Deuteronomy chapter 17. So before Israel ever entered the land of promise, before they left the Judges era, before they entered into the kingdom era, God had already spoken about this time in their history. He had told Moses to write these regulations down because there would come a time that Israel would want a king like the peoples around them. He gives 5 regulations to guide them when they choose a king, that he has to descend from one of the tribes in Israel. He can't go back to Egypt to build his military might because God had promised to be their protector and their shield. He told them that he couldn't have multiple wives because his heart would depart from the Lord, that he could not use his own personal position to increase his own wealth. And the final regulation he gave them that he had to be a Bible literate man. He had to obtain a book of the law from a scribe. He had to write his own copy and read it all the days of his life so that he would not exalt his head above the heads of his people. And it's interesting because when we're introduced to the first king of Israel, he's described as head and shoulders above everyone else. And so that introduction is by the writers demonstrating to us, wow, you need to pay attention because this man is not going to fulfill the regulations that God had commanded them back in Deuteronomy. So when we're introduced to Saul, Saul is from a tribe of Israel. He's from Benjamin. Had he bothered to read the book of the law, he would have known and understood the importance of obedience, especially in 2 areas that mar the beginning of his tenure as a king. So the first one is when he's panicking. There's a battle ensuing, and he's been told to wait for the prophet. And so he's waited. He needs to wait 7 days, and he's waited almost probably to the midnight hour of the 7th day. And it says that he panics and he offers the burnt offering himself to the Lord. So had he read the book of Leviticus, he would have known very clearly that this is something only the Levites were commanded to do. And as a result of this, when Samuel does arrive, he tells him immediately, this is going to cost you the kingdom. So if one disobedience wasn't enough, he follows immediately with another act of disobedience. So had he read the book of the law, he would have read twice, once in Exodus and once in Deuteronomy, that because of how the Amalekites had treated Israel when they came up out of the wilderness, that God one day was going to destroy them as a people group. And so now the time arrives when Samuel comes to him and tells him it's time to destroy the Amalekites. And instead of walking in obedience, he half-heartedly kills the Amalekite people, keeping their king and their plunder alive. So when Samuel shows up and confronts him, you see that all he's worried about is being elevated above the people. So again, what is he captures really that whole lack of Bible literacy because he's exalted himself above the people that God has called him to. And so then what you see is that God's promises through Samuel's prophecy, the kingdom would be taken from him and given to another. So we're introduced to King David in the early part of his youth. And he's described as being having musical ability. And it's this musical ability that catapults him into Saul's household. But because he has been in the wilderness and he's got this exalted view of God and he worships the Lord God. And so when they're looking for a musician, there's an anonymous person in Saul's household who recommends David. And David is catapulted right there into Saul's service. And what do you sing? He's singing praise music to the Lord, and it gives Saul momentary relief. Not only that, you see that he has this large view of God that he brings into the story when he faces Goliath. In fact, when he arrives on the scene, he makes this statement, "For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel." And so what you see is he has a large view of God that catapults him right there into the midst of the battle to where he does stand in opposition to Goliath, not because he's big, but because his God is so big that he experiences victory. Well, the third thing that you see here is a skill that he developed as a shepherd boy in obscurity, the ability to be able to take a slingshot and with pinpoint accuracy slay his target. So you see that his slingshot skills slay the giant that had cowered an entire army. So what you see in the shadows of God developing this man who would be known as a man after God's own heart, a king after God's own heart. So you see David's ascension to the throne. It won't be easy. He'll spend nearly 13 years fleeing from Saul, this paranoid king. And those 13 years will not be wasted. It will be continuation of his preparation to be king, just like he was trained in his youth with these three skills that God will use. What's taking place in the wilderness as he runs from King Saul and so on, and all these things that occur, so that when God does catapult him into the throne of Israel, that he has been trained by God himself.